This is Financial Standard, the definitive source of news, thought leadership and analysis for Australian wealth management professionals. Financial Standard. Take the lead.
I'm Cassandra Baldini with Financial Standard. Earlier in the week, and after a lot of waiting on the industry's part, Treasurer Jim Chalmers announced Labor's proposed objective of superannuation. The proposed objective, which is open for consultation, is to preserve savings to deliver income for a dignified retirement with government support in an equitable and sustainable way. The development has been largely welcomed by super funds, but others argue that it seeks to help those funds more than individual Australians. Here with me today to discuss the proposed objective is QMV Legal Managing Partner Jonathan Steffanoni. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So tell me, what is the government trying to achieve here, and what will having a legislative objective mean?
Well, I feel that government is trying to address an issue which has been prominent for a lot of superannuation trustees over the past decade or so, in that the superannuation industry is looking for some policy stability following plenty of turbulent change and policy which is made with very little lead time to implement. And sometimes there's a bit of a sentiment that there's not a clear, coherent policy direction for the entire superannuation system. Intent of government is to legislate a purpose which is going to orient future changes to the law, and it'll provide some political gravity against which future parliaments will need to align with when making changes to the law. I think it's also important to highlight the fact that legislating a purpose for the superannuation system is something which is intended to guide Parliament and the laws which it makes, and it isn't something which is intended to apply directly to superannuation trustees. There are other laws which have similar effect to achieve that.
And, we know the Labor Party's handling of superannuation so far has been quite different to that of the former Liberal government, which allowed Australians to access their super fund during the pandemic. How will having an objective impact the existing rules around early release of super funds in times of financial hardship?
Well, legislating a purpose for the superannuation system is unlikely to have a direct legal effect on measures such as early release schemes. What legislating a purpose will do is provide a political benchmark against which future changes to the laws will need to be justified when government is going through its consultation process. So on that point, it's probably important to just touch on the legal operation of a change of this nature. While legislating the purpose of the superannuation system is going to carry a certain political gravity, in legal terms, there are good reasons why it's unlikely to act as a constraint on future laws. There's a fundamental principle in the way that Australia's political system works called parliamentary sovereignty. What this essentially means is that Parliament can't create laws which would operate to tie the hands of future parliaments and limit the laws in which they can make. So it is a possible misconception that legislating the purpose for the superannuation system would act as some kind of constraint on what future parliaments might do when they're making changes to the laws. Another discussion which often comes up when discussing the purpose of super is whether it can act as a reference point when interpreting the existing superannuation laws. Again, it's unlikely that there is going to be a significant role that a legislated purpose plays in interpreting the superannuation laws which we have. There are well-established principles of statutory interpretation which would work in a way which laws need to be interpreted based on the materials available at the time that Parliament makes the laws. So you can't take a later piece of legislation or piece of material and then use that retrospectively to interpret the intent of Parliament at an earlier time. Where it could be useful is where there are future changes to the law. So having a legislated purpose may be useful in interpreting future changes to superannuation laws, but it's important to emphasise it's not going to have retrospective effects in terms of interpreting the law.
Do you think that Australians should be able to access their super in moments of crisis?
Yeah, there are a couple of existing measures which do allow for Australians to get access to their superannuation. There are measures which have existed for decades now that will allow Australians in situations of financial hardship or certain compassionate grounds to get access to a portion of their superannuation savings. Obviously, there are tight controls on that, and the circumstances are limited. But having some measures which cater to people who find themselves in really difficult circumstances is something which has been operating effectively for quite a long time now, and I don't see any reason why that should change.
And so far, funds have welcomed the consultation paper, which perhaps isn't surprising. But do you think this is also a win for Australians?
I do feel that legislating the purpose for superannuation is something which does create the prospect of some greater policy stability with such a long-term system such as we have with our super system. It's really important that there is some stability in policy settings. Having a legislated purpose will provide a political anchor towards which future laws will need to be justified against. So I think that is something which will flow through the system and provide for greater stability and therefore better outcomes for Australians in their retirement savings.
And following the update, Chalmers also confirmed Labor is likely to pursue amendments to super tax concessions due to the strained federal budget. What do you think is the most likely outcome, and how could it impact Australians?
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic which has gathered a bit of interest over the last 6 to 9 months. I think there will be some move to limit the concessional taxation treatment of certain balances above a threshold that are held in superannuation accounts. There's a really good, robust debate which will need to be had as to where you draw that line and at what point does accumulating savings in a tax-free environment no longer be for the purpose of retirement savings and starts to be for another purpose, which could be estate planning and wealth generation. So I think there is a debate which is consistent with the existing legal framework, which already imposes a sole purpose test for superannuation funds being to exist for retirement savings and income purposes. If we were to have some kind of limit at which concessional taxation no longer applies, that kind of change would be consistent with the broader policy settings.
So it does seem a super shakeup is on the horizon once again. Is there anything else you think we should expect in 2023?
The other major area of focus where we expect there'll be quite a lot of debate is the extent to which we see changes to the way financial advice is regulated. So off the back of the recently released Quality of Advice Review paper, we're likely to see quite a lot of attention on those recommendations, and it will be quite interesting to see the extent to which government does pick up the recommendations. We'll need to wait and see, but I feel there's a combination of low-hanging fruit, which might be relatively easy for government to pick up and legislate, and some more fundamental changes, which the pathway through Parliament is probably a little bit less certain.
Well, thank you so much for sharing those insights with us today.
Been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this Financial Standard podcast. For more information, visit financialstandard.com.au. Please keep in mind that the information discussed in this podcast is general in nature and does not consider personal circumstances. Reliance should not be placed on any content without further independent financial research and advice.